In 1974, Doctor Who was in a transitional period. Producer Barry Letts and script editor Terrance Dicks were moving on, and taking the reins were new producer Philip Hinchcliffe and veteran writer Robert Holmes. Despite inheriting several elements from the old regime, including the casting of Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen, Hinchcliffe and Holmes had a clear vision, and knew how to use the available resources and casting to realise it. Together, they created a winning formula which led to some of the show's most popular and controversial episodes. Let's look at one of the most popular stories from that time and what it tells us about Hinchcliffe and Holmes' vision for the show. That's right, it's Morbin time. I'm sorry. Look, if Big Finish can make that joke, I can make that joke too, okay? Taken off course by the Time Lords, the Doctor and Sarah Jane arrive on the planet Khan, a stormy wasteland littered with marooned ships and alien corpses. They're welcomed by Solon, a famed neurosurgeon turned follower of Morbius, a disgraced Time Lord reduced to a brain in a jar. Solon plans to reassemble this evil tyrant, literally crowning him with the Doctor's head. Meanwhile, the Sisterhood of Khan believes the TARDIS team is here to steal the Eternal Flame, the source of their immortality, requiring a living sacrifice to sustain it. Throw in some body horror, Sarah going blind, and a potentially canon-breaking sequence, and you've got one of the most famous stories of this time. If Season 12 sowed the seeds of this gothic horror vision, Season 13 sees it flourish into something truly special, and The Brain of Morbius has all the hallmarks of that period. From the beginning, the story is dripping in atmosphere, with dark shadows and an overall grim tone. It's a standard mad scientist story, but the mix of locations, great production design, and a deliciously evil performance from regular Who guest star Philip Maddock help it stand out as one of the show's creepiest horror stories. Personally, it's never been a favourite, but I've always liked the creepy mood and setting, making it a great example of Hinchcliffe and Holmes' vision for the show. But what was this vision? When Philip Hinchcliffe joined as a fresh-faced producer, he had strong ideas on how to revamp the series, which he shared with writer Robert Holmes. In Doctor Who magazine, Philip outlined their core ingredients for the show, the first being the understanding that there were only so many stories the show could tell, so they aimed for variety. The contemporary setting of the Third Doctor's era had put the creative team off alien invasion stories, and so Philip aimed to take the show into more imaginative, otherworldly settings. A space station in the far future, a planet at the furthest reach of the universe, and a radically reimagined Gallifrey. The Brain of Morbius began life as a story more suited to the old series guidelines, with Terrance Dicks' original script involving a marooned and dying Morbius being reassembled by his robot servant. As a machine, it has no eye for aesthetics, resulting in a patchwork Frankenstein-styled body. Feeling this idea was impractical and lacked the desired horror elements, Robert Holmes completely rewrote the story, leading an understandably miffed Terry to ask that his name be removed and replaced with a Bland pseudonym. The finished episodes are credited to Robin Bland.
Well, that seems kind of petty.
With these new settings established, Hinchcliffe aimed to make them as convincing as possible, using the production design, music, and direction to create a fully immersive atmosphere. Audiences would be staying in these locations for up to 6 weeks, so they needed to be engaging and believable enough to keep you hooked. Part of the reason these episodes still mostly hold up visually is that the team knew exactly what could and couldn't be realised within the confines of the studio. Philip made a point to discuss what was feasible with the design department and shape the stories around that, with the robot from Terry's original script being one such case. This didn't always work. But with the incredible sets of Roger Murray Leach, direction from the likes of David Maloney and Douglas Camfield, plus an eerie score from Dudley Simpson, you have some of the best looking and sounding Doctor Who stories. Khan in The Brain of Morbius is a great example of this. It's cast in darkness, there's constant thunder and lightning, and aside from the main cast, it's a barren wilderness. The story takes place almost entirely at night, adding an extra level of isolation. Much of this atmosphere comes from the story being entirely studio-bound, with no location filming or effect shots, a first for the show. It lends the story a sort of theatre vibe, and the lack of cutaways or location shots means our characters are trapped in this dark, uncaring environment. I say uncaring because there's just a general nastiness to the whole thing. The Sisterhood see all outsiders as a threat, even trying to burn the Doctor at the stake. Solon has no regard for the lives he takes, and his constant berating of Kondo is just horrible. He literally chops off his hand and promises to return it when they're done, only to attach it to the Morbius creature. It's morbid stuff, but Tom Baker and Liz Sladen's chemistry is so strong that there's still some levity amongst all the horror. The setting is further fleshed out through strong world building, introducing elements which continue to impact the wider canon. The Sisterhood of Khan returned in Big Finish and eventually on screen in Night of the Doctor and Series 9. Novels have fleshed out the long-standing history between Khan and Gallifrey with this line,
I was born in these parts, within a couple of billion miles, yes.
Always suggesting to me that the Doctor has visited Khan before, maybe even as a child. Morbius has also lived on through Big Finish and fan films starring this excellent voice actor whom I have no connection to whatsoever. But this story's most complicated legacy has to be the Morbius Doctors. Oh boy, let's get into this. During part 4, the Doctor challenges Morbius to a mind bend, basically telepathic wrestling, using a device Morbius just has lying around. The Doctor's previous faces flash on the screen, Pertwee, Troughton, Hartnell, and then 8 other faces, with Morbius commenting, yeah, the Timeless Children didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. Despite decades of fans attempting to reconcile these faces as previous versions of Morbius, the production team have been crystal clear since day one that these faces represent previous Doctors. It's in the script, on production paperwork, and they're even played by members of the crew, including Holmes and Hinchcliffe. The 12 regeneration rule was introduced in the next season, and decades later they were revealed as the faces of the Timeless Child in the Series 12 finale. Chris Chibnall even emailed Philip Hinchcliffe to let him know he's technically a canon Doctor. So before you go moaning about the canon being destroyed, remember these guys destroyed it first. So you got a story and a world to set it in, but how do you grab viewers of all ages? Whether or not Doctor Who is a kids show is subject to many a heated argument, but Philip Hinchcliffe was clear with who he was making the show for: clever 12 and 13-year-olds and their parents. Kids are naturally drawn to the monsters and the adventures, and Tom Baker's eccentric performance appealed to rebellious students, but how to keep the parents watching? Robert Holmes felt that audiences connected with sci-fi the best when the story contained familiar elements to latch onto, recognizable tropes and archetypes usually drawn from classic fiction and pop culture. This is where he and Hinchcliffe began sharing their inspirations, with Philip having a passion for Romantic era literature and Holmes admitting a fondness for old movies, specifically horror films. They aimed to fertilize the series by borrowing from richer, well-known themes from acknowledged classics. Robert confessed to always ripping off the classic horror films, with Pyramids of Mars taking from The Mummy, The Seeds of Doom from The Thing from Another World, and Planet of Evil drawing on Jekyll and Hyde and Forbidden Planet. Even the name Morbius is taken from that film, and sadly not from the greatest superhero movie ever made. Last Morbius joke, I promise. In terms of literature, The Deadly Assassin borrows from The Manchurian Candidate, and Leela's relationship with the Doctor is consciously very Eliza Doolittle and Professor Higgins in Pygmalion. But when trying to grab older viewers, Holmes looked to the success of Hammer horror. From the 50s to the late 70s, this British film company began making waves by bringing new blood to Count Dracula, The Mummy, and Frankenstein's monster. With the relaxation of censorship, these films embraced the blood and the gothic, turning Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing into household names and creating an institution in the process. The Dracula series was a particular moneymaker, from Terence Fisher's original adaptation to the acid trip that is Dracula AD 1972.
Dig the music, kids.
These films had a clear impact on Doctor Who, serving as direct inspiration for several Tom Baker stories. Pyramids of Mars takes imagery and key moments from Hammer's Mummy films, the titular villain of Talons of Wen-Chiang is right out of Phantom of the Opera, and the brain of Morbius is transparently Frankenstein. Peter Cushing was even offered the role of Solon, having played the original Dr. Frankenstein in the Hammer series, but just one more ingredient was needed to complete the formula. One of the things that separates the classic series from the modern is its serialized format. Stories are spread across 4 to 6 weeks, fully immersing viewers in their world and characters. It's a format Philip Hinchcliffe strongly believes in, even suggesting the show return to it, feeling that the modern series' episodic format doesn't work as well. But this serialization allowed for one of the show's most famous elements: the cliffhanger. Philip knew that to keep viewers coming back, they needed each episode to end on a striking image. The tone of Hinchcliffe and Holmes' cliffhangers is significantly darker. They reveal a monster, show the Doctor or Sarah in mortal danger, or in a trick often deployed by director David Maloney, utilize freeze frames to literally freeze our heroes in peril. The Brain of Morbius employs many of these tricks. The formula seems to be Sarah Jane stumbling upon something terrifying. The first is the headless Morbius, the reveal of his bubbling brain in a jar, and the Finnish monster rising behind her. Yeah, Sarah goes for a lot in this. They say keep the audience wanting more, and these cliffhangers certainly did, with Brain of Morbius quickly climbing to 10 million viewers over 4 weeks. It remains one of the most popular stories and a prime example of this winning formula. There are certainly more thought-provoking stories from this period, but even if Hinchcliffe insists that he never used the word gothic behind the scenes, Morbius is as gothic as Doctor Who gets. It's a story seemingly designed to be watched on a cold autumn evening, and it embraces being a horror movie with sci-fi trappings. And with moments that continue to be discussed to this day, it has more than earned its place in the show's history of terrifying children. Speaking of which, Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes' formula was a success, with 13 million viewers tuning in at its peak. Tom Baker became a national treasure and the show was loved by audiences of all ages, including its future showrunners. And yet, the darker stories started causing waves in the press, with the Brain of Morbius sparking a sensationalist panic that may have led to the end of this golden era.
What Bob and I discovered was that, having made the series more adult and more realistic, we had to run up against the thin dividing line between what is acceptable to Saturday tea time family viewing and what is not.
The violence in the show came under fire, and the Brain of Morbius is pretty intense. There's the body horror of a monster made of alien corpses, the Doctor nearly being burned at the stake in a stunt which nearly killed Tom Baker.
So I shouted, "Tom, jump!" And he went, "What?" I said, "Jump!" And the fire brigade came in and, sorted it all out.
And the moment that caused the most controversy, Kondo being shot in the stomach. The way his guts just splatter out is one of the most graphic scenes ever seen on the show, and yet it only got a PG on the DVD release. It doesn't kill him instantly since he redeems himself by saving Sarah Jane, but even today it's a shocking image that the show would never try now. Even the Doctor isn't innocent in this story. He saves the day by concocting a poisonous gas from his dungeon which kills Solon. I mean, he was a bad dude, but come on. This story is unrelentingly grim in places, which is maybe why it's never fully connected with me. Critics at the time were more harsh. One young fan wrote in to complain that the show was becoming nasty and a bit stupid. You, Shaden, tell us what you really think. But there was one critic whose take on the show caused the most uproar in the British press. Yes, it's time to talk about Mary Whitehouse. The 70s were a time of great political and cultural change, with the baby boomers coming of age and great strides towards liberation in feminism, LGBT rights, and the relaxation of censorship. Mary Whitehouse, founder of the National Viewers and Listeners Association, wasn't happy about this, believing it would create a permissive society and blaming television for this perceived decline in moral standards. She began lobbying the BBC, its Director General, and the British government, fighting against the rise in sex and violence on TV. She was so persistent that Downing Street began deliberately losing her letters so they wouldn't have to reply. Her crusades led to the wider moral panic around video nasties and protecting children from obscene media. The public continues to be divided by Mary and her quest to clean up TV. She did some good through raising awareness of the effects of explicit content on children and even successfully passing legislation to protect them, but her focus on sex and bad language led her to be perceived as narrow-minded and reactionary, admitting she didn't even watch the media she was calling to ban. It also can't be ignored that Mary was, even for an older woman in the 70s, openly homophobic, something even her family challenged her on.
I deeply resented many of her ideas, particularly around homosexuality. I do remember sort of saying to her, you know, why are you so interested in what people get up to in bed? I mean, it's really nothing to do with anybody else.
She described it as a phase all children went through, attacked any representation on screen, and even claimed that homosexuality could be cured. Admittedly, these views were informed by her age and religious upbringing, but as she called to ban everything from sitcoms to Schools Out by Alice Cooper, it's understandable why she remains so controversial. Oh yeah, wasn't this video about Doctor Who? One of White House's biggest targets was our favourite blue box show. She'd been lobbying against the programme as far back as the 60s, claiming that the Daleks would inspire kids to kill each other. No, really. But her criticism of the Tom Baker era received a lot of attention. She described Genesis of the Daleks as tea-time brutality for tots, and was constantly appalled by the violence and horror in the series. The production team were well aware of her activities, with Tom Baker claiming to have invited her out for lunch, which she declined, but it was with the brain of Morbius that Mary's campaigns became a major obstacle. Following the story's broadcast, White House wrote to BBC chairman Michael Swan demanding the show be moved to a later time slot to prevent young children from watching. At the time, Doctor Who was airing at 5:40, which is admittedly much earlier than the show would go out in 2025. Her complaints were being heard, and prompted a larger conversation about how suitable the show was for children.
Doctor Who seems the most horrific programme that you could ever see.
One outlet even ran an article asking over 300 schoolchildren about the show, with 80% saying they enjoyed it and only 10% being scared of it. Looking at retrospectives and archive interviews, it seems the kids still enjoyed the show and its scariest scenes. They're the moments that stick with viewers, and leaning the series towards the gothic was clearly working. There's plenty of strangulation, monstrous transformations, and creepy imagery, but for the most part, it's fairly removed from reality. The blood in this story is a notable exception, and I think potentially crosses the line for a 5 o'clock show, especially with the overall dark mood of the story and the Doctor killing a man. Even Philip Hinchcliffe was dissatisfied with elements of the story, feeling they leaned too close to Frankenstein and wishing he'd pulled back with the grotesque imagery. The modern series tends to avoid blood, aiming for fantasy horror with successes like Blink and The Well from the last season. But to claim that the Tom Baker seasons are filled with violence is a bit of a stretch. The production team never set out to make a show for very young children, and were always clear in their intentions. I'd argue that for the target age range of 12 to 13, these stories are perfectly suitable. Morbius is definitely the grimmest, but there's enough humour and frills to keep the story fun and engaging. However, the fallout of Morbius had a lasting impact on the show, marking the beginning of the end for Hinchcliffe and Holmes' winning formula. By 1977, the BBC moved Doctor Who to a later time, and it took just one more controversy for them to begin retooling the show. Remember how David Maloney liked to use freeze-frame cliffhangers? Well, this came back to bite him when he ended The Deadly Assassin Part 3 on a close-up of the Doctor being drowned. Mary Whitehouse called the cliffhanger sadistic, and even claimed she'd heard from a mother that her son threatened to copy this drowning on his brother. She received an apology from the BBC Director General, and the final shot was removed from future broadcasts. But it was following this backlash that Philip Hinchcliffe was informed he was leaving Doctor Who. He was already discussing ideas for a 4th season with Robert Holmes, but one day he was suddenly introduced to his successor, Graham Williams, and was told he'd be moving on to another show after training Graham on his last story. Holmes stuck around for Graham's first season before handing over to Anthony Reed. To this day, Philip isn't certain he was replaced in response to Whitehouse's criticism, but given Graham Williams was specifically ordered to tone down the violence, it seems to be the case. The lighter tone of his seasons and Douglas Adams bringing more comedy into the series was a result of these mandates, drawing Doctor Who's horror era to a close. While it seemingly ended due to a moral outcry, Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes' era remains one of the most popular in Doctor Who history. The fact that The Brain of Morbius isn't even a favourite of mine and I was able to write this much about it speaks volumes to how strong this period is. Rusty Davis would later describe the pairing of Holmes and Hinchcliffe as magic, and it seems the combination of new blood leading an experienced production team was the magic ingredient for these seasons. With immersive alien worlds and imaginative scripts remixing classic literary conventions, they built a winning formula that enthralled fans young and old and continues to shape the show today. Stories like The Ark in Space, Pyramids of Mars, and The Face of Evil are some of my all-time favourites, and while it skirted the line of acceptability for a tea-time show, Hinchcliffe and Holmes built a mighty gothic canon that stands the test of time remarkably well. So, as the nights get longer and colder, why not snuggle up on the sofa, or even get behind it, to watch some of the best the classic series has to offer. just maybe give Talons a skip.
Are you Chinese?
Yeah.